بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So Alhamdulillah, we've explained some basic rules regarding haqiqah and majaz, and we're going to quickly recap what we've done so far. So a quick overview of Usool al-Shashi is, we have Usool al-Shashi, and then here we have different headings. And the first heading that we're discussing is Al-Bahth al-Awwal, is Kitabullah, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Correct? And in Kitabullah, we have a few analysis, different aspects we analyze words. The first aspect is bi'timad al-wad'i, how the word has been coined. In there we had khas, we had am. In khas we said we have mutlaq and muqayyad. Mutlaq is unrestricted, and muqayyad is a restricted fard. And am includes all the afrad, like maqsoos and ghayr maqsoos. We have mushtarak, where a word has multiple meanings, and mu'awwal is where the one meaning has been determined via ijtihad. If that one meaning is determined via tafsir, it's called mufassar. And am maqsoos, am ghayr maqsoos. Khas is qat'i, am ghayr maqsoos is qat'i, am maqsoos is dhanni. Mushtarak mufassar, mushtarak which become mufassar is qat'i, and a mushtarak which has become mu'awwal is dhanni. Then we move on to bi'tibar isti'mal, how that word is used. We went on to discuss how that word is used. How that word is used. It is either going to be a haqiqah, how that word has been coined, it is used in that actual meaning. The second scenario is, and then in the day we went through the aqsam of haqiqah. Haqiqah, musta'mala, the use haqiqah, the muta'adhira and the mahjura. On which one, and then we mentioned the rule of haqiqah is awla min al-majaz. In musta'mala, in muta'adhira and mahjura use majaz, and in musta'mala you see how much isti'mal is. And then we had the ikhlaf from Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayh. And then in majaz we are on to discuss how is majaz linked to haqiqah. How is majaz linked to haqiqah? It's a na'ib, in lafz or in ma'na, both. Now we're going to go through tariqul majaz. Now, those of you who have not studied balagha with us, then it will be ideal to go through our videos, first understanding balagha or duru's balagha, and look in the majaz section in there, or a booklet, go through that and make the next section very easy. Okay? But a simple recap is as such. Now you have a haqiqah, and from the haqiqah we go to the majaz. From the haqiqah we go to the majaz. Now, you can't just jump from haqiqah to majaz without any relationship, because then our kalam will be just null and void. If I said to you, for example, go to town and buy me a pen, and you came back with, 2 kilograms of lamb. I said, well, I thought by pen you meant lamb. It's like, how did pen mean lamb? What's the link between pen and lamb? It has to have a link for him. So in the Quran, in the Hadith, even our day-to-day language, when we say one word, it means something else. It's not just everything means random stuff, because you can't communicate. But there's a link, a reason why the haqiqah has now been used in a majaz form. So for example, we have wabatalul yatama, test the yatama. So what it's referring to is that the orphans, if their father passed away, then the money and their assets lie in possession of the wali. When they reach the age of maturity, then test them. Hatta idha balagun nikah, umurun nikah. They have reached the age of nikah, meaning they're mature and baligh. فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا, if you can understand, and you have sense that they are now able to understand what money is about, how to spend, how to earn, how to give, not they want to make loss in that money, فَادْفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُم. Now technically speaking, when they reach nikah, they are no longer yatim, are they? A person 60 years old, my father passed away, I'm a yatim. Not 60, you're not yatim. You're yatim when you're not reached the age of nikah. For him. But majazan, a person who was yatim, you can still call him a yatim. So when the yatim who has now reached the age of maturity, they still call him yatim. Who was a yatim is a link. And it's so understandable in our mind. We never have a question unless I raise a question to you. Similarly in the Quranic verse, Surah Yusuf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, regarding the dream of one of the people in prison, is Sahiba Yusishni. So one of the inni arani a'silu khamra. I can see myself squeezing khamr. So you can't actually squeeze khamr. What do you squeeze? The dates and the grapes and not dates, but the grapes, which become wine. So khamr means, you understand from that easily. So that's in balagha, and that's something we've covered before. So you have to have a munasaba, or we call that what? I think in usool, in usool, you call it a munasaba, and in balagha you call it an alaqa. So you have to have a link between the haqiqah and the majaz. This is all stuff that we have covered many times before. But because now what we're discussing fiqh, and in usool fiqh, and in fiqh, we're looking at not language as per se, how you express ourselves, but rather what rulings can we derive and how are the rulings derived from these issues. So what we're going to look at first is this masala here. So وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْإِسْتِعَارَةَ. Okay. Now again, those of you who have done balagha, just as a side note, you have to remember, if you've not done balagha, you wouldn't know this anyways. But if you've done balagha, then to clarify that in balagha we have tashbih. Correct? You have tashbih when you have the mushabba and the mushabba bihi, and you compare the two things together. And then from there you have what? You have isti'ara. Correct? And you have majaz mursal. You have tamthil, all of those things. In Usool fiqh, this is all called what? Isti'ara. Do you understand? So do not think that this is isti'ara is the mushabba bihi, and the mushabba bihi is removed. Majaz mursal also comes under isti'ara. So those of you then balagha, remember that isti'ara has a broader meaning. It refers to any of the non-haqiqa basically. Isti'ara means anything apart from haqiqa. Yeah, so in fiqh it's different to usul hadith. Usul fiqh is different to balagha. So we say isti'ara, what do we mean? Majaz, any non-haqiqa. So isti'ara, majaz, same thing. So any non-haqiqa word. So اعلم أن الاستعارة في أحكام الشرع مضطردة بطريقين. Yeah, بطريقتين. That in isti'ara, in shari'i ahkams. So in shari'i ahkams, the isti'ara is muttarida. Is to be a fixed rule, to be unique, not to be unique, to be common in two ways. Meaning, in shari'i rulings, in fiqhi rulings, isti'ara can be used in two ways. Meaning the two alaqas basically. Are you following? Because bi'tibari ma kan, bi'tibari ma yukun, what the orphans were, now they become that. All of the other alaqat that we said in balagha are not really important here. In usul fiqh, and by extension in fiqh, when we talk about isti'ara, there are two alaqa, two munasaba, why we will leave between the haqiq and the majazi meaning that we're going to study. Do you understand? So there are two alaqa which we're going to study. What are these two alaqa? Let me explain. We have something called an illah. What do we have? An illah. An illah is something which is a direct cause of the hukam. So after illah, you have a direct cause of the hukam. Let's take an example. Shira. What does shira mean? To purchase, to buy. So when you buy something, that directly leads to what? Ownership. So the shira is the illah of the hukam, which is milk. So shira is the illah of milk. Illah is linked directly to the hukam. Correct? You understand that so far? And along with this, we have something called sabab. Sabab is basically a step before the illah. So look at the example here. We could use the same example if you want to. We could say, for example, here. Let's take this example here because it's coming up later on. Tahrir. What does tahrir mean? To free somebody. Okay. So if you free somebody, you free a slave. So when you free a slave, what happens now? What does that lead to? What's the direct result of the freedom? That zawalu milki raqaba. That slave is you no longer have authority over that person. That person is now free. Yes, so Islam encourages emancipation. Any mistakes like manslaughter, you break a fast, you break an oath, all of these things, the recommendation is to free a slave, to try to remove the slavery. So now we have tahrir. So tahrir leads to what's tahrir that caused directly? Zawalu milki raqaba. To remove milk raqaba, meaning you no longer have ownership over that person. You following? Now, if that person was a female, the slave is a female, so when the person is a slave, you have certain rules. So basically that person now you have access to, when he's a slave, you have the different rules. One of the additional rules of a female is you have access, basically, if you have intercourse with that lady, it's not zina. Yes? It's not zina, it's halal for you. You have now, the same way you have access to your wife, you also have access to the free slave. Now again, this is not a book about removing doubts about Islam, but all he's saying is when you have a raqaba, when you have a slave girl, is that intercourse with her is not zina, it's permissible for you. Yes? Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi, in one chapter, he's talking Kitab al-Nikah, he mentions the being good to your wife. That's the topic of the chapter. Remember this chapter? And in this, he mentions hadith about whom? The neighbor. Yes? He mentions rules about the neighbor. So the chapter is talking about, I can't remember the full reading is, but the benefit or the virtue of being good to your wife. And he brings hadith about the neighbor. What's he trying to say? If the Prophet ﷺ said that Jibreel Ameen then wasiyah to me so much that I was fearful that the neighbor might even inherit from me. That's how much the rights of the neighbor. So where does the neighbor live? The next house. Who lives in the same house? Your wife. So obviously if the neighbor has so much rights, how much rights does your wife have? Are you following? If Allah, in Islam it says that there's discussions. Do not overburden an animal. Do not overburden an animal. We done yesterday what? The masala, can 3 people ride 1 horse or 1 camel? Because 1 is okay, 2 the camel might be able to bear it. If you have 3 and 4 now, people on 1 camel, 1 horse, 1 donkey, is burdensome. So it's a discussion. So if an animal, so when it says that a slave girl you have authority over her, meaning having intercourse with her is not zina, she's halal for you. It doesn't mean you can rape her or do whatever you want. If you're not allowed to treat an animal in a way where it causes an animal inconvenience, that's what the fuqaha have mentioned. But here we don't discuss every single rule, every single place. Like every single time you say, when you're discussing the milkul bud'a of a slave girl, you're not going to mention under these conditions. That's understood from other places. That you have to treat her nice and kindly. And intercourse with her is not zina, intercourse with her is permissible. Yes? The same way you have, but then you have certain systems that you can't harm her, cause it difficulty, force yourself upon it. It's all second. But that's another masla on the side anyways. So what we're saying here is that when you free somebody, that leads to directly what? That you no longer have authority over their body. Meaning they're free. And if that slave is a free woman, then now you cannot have access to her. Meaning intercourse with her is haram. So now the authority that you have over her over her private parts, meaning you have access to it, it's halal for you. That goes away. So now freeing is a sabab for the hukam. Because why? It comes via the authority or the hilla of the bud'a comes as a result being removed. The bud'a, the milk of the bud'a coming to an end comes about as a result of what? The milk al-raqabah. Do you understand? So tahrir is not an illa for zawal milk al-bud'a, but rather it comes via a stage. Do you understand? So what we're seeing here now, when we have an illa, we have sabab, illa and hukam. We have 3 stages. Another example we could use here, for example, is shira. So shira leads to what? Milkur raqabah. Means to milkur raqabah. And milkur raqabah leads to, if she's a female then, milkul, you have access now, it's permissible for you to have intercourse with her. You understand? It's not a zina. Is that, you understand? So this is sabab illa and hukam. So what we're saying here is, اعلم أن الاستعارة في أحكام الشرع مضطردة بطريقين. That when we're looking at حقيقة and majaz, correct? In أحكام الشرعية, we're looking at it from 2 ways. What's the 2 ways? أحدهما لوجود الاتصال بين العلة والحكم. We're looking at the link between the illah and the hukam. Correct? والثاني لوجود الاتصال بين السبب المحض والحكم. Okay. So if you go back to the top chart here, what we're saying here is this you can have. This is the haqiqah, shira. But when you say shira, what do you mean instead? Milk. This becomes the majaz. Or you can say the word milk. What do you mean? What do you mean when you say milk? What do you mean? Shira. Yes, you understand? What he's saying is, you can say the word milk. So the haqiqi meaning of milk is what? To own something. But you say, I said the word milk, malaktu, I own something. But you actually meant the majaz meaning, which is what? Shira. Or you could say, I said the word shira'un, ishtaraytu, as a haqiqi meaning to purchase something, but I actually meant what? The majaz meaning, which is what? To own something. You can have it this way. You can say, harartu, I free. And you actually meant, okay, so the other way, let's go this way. Let's say, for example, we got one example for now. We do the other example when it comes there. I don't want to get confused. So what we're saying is that the haqiqa and majaz was alaqa illa and hukam. Do you understand? Yes? So in fiqh, we're talking about the alaqa, which is the illa and the hukam. Or the other one is sabab mahad and hukam. We go to sabab mahad. Acha. He says a sababul mahdi. Sababul mahdh means sabab basically. But he said mahdh for a reason. So he says illa. What's illa? So you have bay' and milk or raqaba, yes? The bay' leads to, if you buy something, what do you own? If you buy a slave, you end up having the milk or raqaba. And sababul mahdh is this. It's in a hasha in your book somewhere here. It's an important hasha. Ma yakunu mufdiyan. Cause. Leads. So it's sababul mahdh ma yakunu mufdiyan illa al-hukm biduni an yakuna mawdu'an lahu. Meaning it's not the illa basically. What's he saying? It's not the illa. What is it? What is it instead? Hukam, sabab. Yes? Basically, let me explain something here. Basically, this one here. Let's look at this last line first. In the footnotes, he's saying here, look. He says, do you understand what sabab is from the chart? Do you understand what illa is? But sometimes they're loose. The fuqaha, when they're speaking, what do they say? Sabab, and they actually mean what? Illa. Do you understand? So when he put the word mahdhun, he's basically saying the sabab, not the illa. Even though sometimes people will call the illa sabab, but we don't mean it there. So it's a bit loose in when we're speaking regarding sabab and illa, it's a lot of, they're not very precise. And they, like majazan, and they loose in that term. Because they both call something, isn't it? So sometimes the illa is called the sabab. So when he says as-sababul mahdh, means the actual sabab, not the majaz sabab, which is the illa. That's basically what we're trying to say here in the mahdh. You understand? So for example, you can leave the top part out. It's in a hash if you want, but this means here. For example, bayt. Yeah, what we explained before. You don't really need this. Because you understand from chart before. The main thing is about mahdhun is to say that the sabab, the actual sabab, which is the sabab, not the illa, which can be called what? Sabab. Do you understand, Abdullah? Everybody following online? So what he's saying is that sabab and illa are sometimes used interchangeably. Because they're very close. Because both of them cause something, don't they? Sabab causes hukam and illa causes hukam. Sabab via the illa and illa directly. So because of this, when we're speaking, sometimes we call the illa what? Sabab. So he says sababul mahdh. So be particular here now, basically. We're being particular, the actual sabab. Not the loose sabab, which you call sabab, which is not really a sabab. Okay. Now, so do you understand? So what are we saying now? To take a majaz meaning in ahkam al-shari'iyya, we don't look at the asbab and the alaqat and the munasabat using balagha. We look at the alaqa from fiqh perspective, which is what? Hukam, illa, hukam, sabab. Correct? Illa is a direct cause of the hukam, and sabab is the indirect cause. What's the indirect? What's the intermediary? The illa. So what he's saying here now is, if you have a relationship between the illa and the hukam, because they're very closely linked, it's a two-way street. If you have an illa and a hukam, is there any intermediary? No intermediary. Are they closely linked or not? Because they're closely linked, it's a way. So what? A two-way street. So you can mention the illa and actually say majaz meaning was the hukam. You can mention the hukam and say the majaz meaning is the illa. Both ways, because they're very strong, very closely linked. So yasihhu tarafain. So when you have an ittisal bayna al-illati wal hukam, it'll become very clear in the example. Just get this in mind. Maybe the example should come first. So if you have an illa and a hukam, so for example, what's the illa of a milk? What causes milk? Shira. So if you say shira, you said I actually meant milk. Is that permissible? If you said milk and you actually meant orange juice, huh? Milk and you actually, it took a bit of time to get the joke. Yeah, so that joke, don't worry, it takes time to get that joke. If you said milk and you actually meant shira, is that permissible? Because it's illa and hukam, and illa and hukam are very close linked, so you can take one. Yasihhu min at-tarafayn, from both ways, up and down, this way and that way, left and right. So you can say illa and actually mean the hukam, or you can say hukam and actually mean the illa, and both are fine. Ittisalu bayna as-sabab al-mahdh wal hukam, between the sabab and the musabbab, sabab and the hukam. What's intermediary? The illa. If they're very strongly linked, there's an intermediary. So there's only one way. You can say sabab and mean the hukam. You can't say the hukam and mean the sabab as majaz. Is that clear to everybody? And obviously, the application is going to come in an example. Now let's make sense of this by example. Okay, so shira and hukam, two-way street. And here's a one-way street, it's going that way. You following? So here you can take it both ways in illa and hukam, and in sabab and hukam, you can take the sabab and the majaz meaning with the hukam. You can't say the hukam and then say meaning is sabab. Let me give you an example. Mithalul awwal. What's the first one? Mithal awwal is? No, it's not. Mithal awwal is what? Why is it Mithal awwal? Illa. Mistake. Illa. Yes, the mithal awwal is what? Al-illa wal-hukm. Yes, so mithal al-awwal, the first example, fima is regarding إذا قال إن ملكت abdan فهو حر. What did he say? If I own a slave. Now hurran is a slave, and that means a full slave or half a slave? Full slave, a slave. If I own a slave. So if I ever come to own a slave, that slave will be free. For him, he made his vow that if I ever own a slave, that slave will be free. Is hur mutlaq, is abdan mutlaq or muqayyad? So it has male or female? Any. Old or young? Any. Mutlaq. So if I own a slave, but when he said mutlaq, is one fard, complete fard, one complete slave. You following? And in slavery, this as you can have property, you can have shares. You can have shares in a slave as well. Correct? So he says, in malaktu abdan fahuwa hur. This is a slave. He buys half. Has he owned a slave? He's owned what? Half a slave. So he buys that slave. Will this half be free? Why not? Has the shirt been found? The shirt has not been found. What's the shirt? Malaktu abdan. Abdan means abdan kamil. Anytime you have a mutlaq, it means fard kamil. Any fard is kamil. So has he owned a full slave? So he bought half a slave. Then what did he do? He sold it or he sold it off. Then he bought the second share. So he two owners. This is two people own one share. So one person owns one person. But you don't have top half, bottom half. But for example, percentage wise. So the 50-50 in a slave. So a person bought a slave and then he half the slave. He bought half, and his friend bought half. They shared. So he bought half. Now does he own a full slave? Is the shirt found? Then he sold his share. Then he bought his other share from his friend. Has he owned a full slave? Does he own a full slave right now? Then he sold. Then does that become free? Why? He is not malak to abdan. He has not owned a slave yet. Are you following? So, yes, I'm going to change this when I get home. So therefore, فَمَلَكَ نِصْفَ الْأَبْدِ. He owned half, he bought half the slave. He owned it. I just want to give it to him as a gift, or he bought it, he got it. He inherited it. Then he sold it. So when he owned half, has he owned a full slave? So is the shirt found? ثُمَّ مَلَكَ نِصْفَ الْآخَرِ. Then he became owner of the other half. His friend gifted it to him, he bought it, or he inherited it. Will the slave become free? Because he did not own a slave. Why? Since. Is here means since. إِذْ لَمْ يَجْتَمِعْ فِي مِلْكِهِ كُلُّ الْعَبْدِ. Since the entire slave did not come in his ownership at one time. Because the entire slave did not come in his ownership at one time. So we'll say here what? That the shirt was not found. وَلَوْ قَالَ إِنِ اشْتَرَيْتُ أَبْدًا. إِنِ اشْتَرَيْتُ أَبْدًا. If I purchase a full slave, فَهُوَ حُرٌّ. Yes? So now, same thing happened. He purchased the first half. Has he purchased a full slave? No. So is that half going to be free? No. He purchased, then he sells off the first half. Then he purchased the second half. Has he now purchased a full slave? Has he purchased a full slave? He's purchased it, hasn't he? He purchased one half, then he purchased the second half. So he's purchased the full half. There's no condition of remaining with ownership. So he's actually purchased that full slave, but he purchased the first half, he then sold it again, then he purchased the second half. So now he's purchased the entire slave. So the slave is going to be free, but he only owns how much? Half. So how much will he get freed? The second half. His share that he has. Well, then the other person will think. So it becomes free, and then the other part becomes free, and now he has to pay off the owner. So when the whole slave becomes free, but his half becomes free. When his half becomes free, the other half becomes free as well, and then you have to pay off the owner, the other part. You understand? You following? Because now in malaktu, you have to own the entire slave. And at one time he never owned the entire slave. And ishtaraytu means purchasing. So he has purchased the entire slave. It doesn't mean you have to have it remain in your ownership. Are you following? So utiqa an-nisfu thani, and then the rules of it will take place. The entire slave become free, and then the other person will have to pay off and whatever you in quduri. But the masala is, in ishtaraytu is haqiqa in purchasing, and malaktu is haqiqa in owning. That's haqiqa. So these are the rulings regarding the what? Haqiqa. Now my guy said what? In ishtaraytu abdan. And they got cold feet. Because why? When you own the second half, what happens to the slave? He invested 10, 20 grand in a slave. What happens now? They want to free it. He said, when I said ishtaraytu, I actually meant what? Malaktu. Is he free? If you said ishtaraytu, but I said ishtaraytu, but I meant malaktu. You're not free. You following? So remember, shira and hukam goes both ways. So in malaktu abdan, fahuwa hurrun la yu'taq. Why? Because he never owned the whole slave. But if he says, in ishtaraytu abdan, fahuwa hurrun yu'taq, because why? He purchased the whole thing. But what if he's trying to play? He says, well, when I said ishtaraytu, so now in here he's free. In here he becomes free, isn't it? But if he said, I said ishtaraytu, but I actually meant what? The majaz meaning. I meant malaktu. Is the slave going to be free? No, because if ishtaraytu meant malaktu, is majaz sahih. So he said, I meant the majaz meaning. So technically speaking, the letter of the law, is he going to be free, the slave? If the owner said, I said ishtaraytu, but I actually meant what? Can you do that both ways? It works, innit? So ishtaraytu can be meant to take what? Malaktu. So technically speaking, we can take his majaz. And the isti'ara is what? Sahih. And the slave will not be freed. However, what is the problem in here? That's a play a whole game, innit? So in terms of the asal rule, it fits. You can say ishtaraytu and mean malaktu. You can say ishtaraytu and mean ishtaraytu, that's haqiqa. You can say malaktu and mean malaktu, that's haqiqa. You can say malaktu and mean ishtaraytu. Or you can say ishtaraytu and mean malaktu majazan. So majaz is sahih, the isti'ara is sahih. But the reason we don't apply this ruling is why? Not because of the majaz being a problem, but because the people are going to mess around with this. Every time they're going to say, oh, so he's saying here, walau ana bil milki shira. If he said, I meant via milk shira, or via shira, I actually meant milk. The isti'ara is permissible because illa and hukam and illa. Sahhat niyyatuhu bi tariq al-majaz. We will say, yes, because of your niyyah, we will accept your majaz. Because shira is the illa of milk, and milk is the hukam, and when you have illa milk, you can do it both ways. However, فَأَمَّتِ الْإِسْتِعَارَةِ, so the isti'ara is now encompassing the illa and the ma'lul from both ways. And I've understood, the text translation is like easy, and we've explained the concept before. However, there are two things you have to keep in mind. There's something called qada, something called diyana. Qada is a court, and diyana is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if this doesn't go to court, it doesn't go to court, between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, no, in my heart I actually meant malaktu. So between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's you. If it goes to court, what's the problem? On a political level or social level, it will cause big problems. So Qazi will say, no, we're not going to accept your qada, because people are going to, it's just a maqam al-tuhma that you could just be saying this to get away from freeing this leave. So qada, and in the Qazi's court, in fiqh wise, your majaz and your isti'ara is all permissible. But we're not going to accept it because there's tuhma in here. If it doesn't go to court, and between you and Allah you're happy, then it doesn't go to court, that's fine. So diyanatan is sahih because the isti'ara and the whole masla fits. But to avoid problems and going on social aspects, secondarily the Qazi will say, no, it doesn't count. Illa, however, فِيمَا يَكُونُ تَخْفِيفًا فِي حَقِّهِ, wherever it lightens his burden. When he said this, what happens to him? His burden is lightened. So however, in those things which lighten his responsibility, lighten his burden, لا يصدق في حق القضاء خاصة. In qada, the judge will not do tasdeeq. The judge will say, no, I do not accept your statement that this is, I meant malaktu. Even though technically it fits. But because of lima'na tuhma, because of tuhma, we will say qada'an is not accepted. We will not say that you said ishtaraytu meant malaktu, even though in the general rule it fits. But limaqami tuhma will not apply. So this ruling applies perfectly in the Hanafi school, but we don't apply it not because of the masala, but because of external factors of social issues, because of tuhma, not because adam is-sihhat al-isti'ara, not because of the isti'ara is not sahih. You understand the masala? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So we were discussing regarding the isti'ara. We said the isti'ara in illa to hukam, you can go both ways. But in sabab, you can only go from sabab to hukam. You can't take the hukam and mean the sabab al-mahad as a majaz. So majaz works both ways. In which one? The illa and the hukam. You can mention a word which is the illa and you say I actually meant the hukam. You can mention a word which implies the hukam and you say I actually meant the illa. In sabab, you can take the sabab and say I intended the hukam as a majaz. But you can't take the majaz, you can't take the hukam and say I intended the hukam as I intended the sabab as a majaz. Okay. For example, what do you have here? The second example. ومثال الثاني إذا قال لامرأته حررتك ونوابه الطلاق. If a person says to his wife حررتك and he says I intended talaq, حررتك, and he says I intended talaq by this. So what we have here? We have tahrir. When you free somebody, what does that result in? That results in the milkul raqaba. The person, you don't have authority over that person anymore. The slave becomes emancipated. So you no longer have access to that person. And if that slave is a female, you no longer have access to intercourse with that. It becomes zina. You're no longer permissible to have intercourse with that slave. Correct? So tahrir leads to milkul bud'a. And milkul bud'a is also what? You no longer have access to that lady when you free her or when you divorce her. So both of these have the same. So if you said harrartuki, and the hukam, what does harrartuki lead to? No longer having access to her via halal access to her. So similarly, if you said harrartuki and you said I actually meant talaq, that's correct. That's permissible. It will work this way. Yes? But it can't work backwards. For example, if you say to your slave girl, talaqtuki, and you say I intended harrartuki, so that wouldn't work. That majaz is not correct. Are you following?
If you use it for your wife.
If you say harrartuki to your wife and you intended talaq, then what will happen? That will lead to talaq. Yeah, because you did from sabab mahd to the hukam. That's permissible. Okay? Yasihu, that will be correct. Yes, if you make niyyah of this. Why? لأن التحرير بحقيقته حقيقة. The حقيقي meaning of tahrir, حررت, is يوجب زوال ملك البضع. This causes or necessitates the milkul bud'a coming to an end. Correct? How? Via the sabab, biwasita, via the means of the intermediary of the milkul raqaba. So via the illa, the sabab, harrar, tahrir, leads to zawali milkul bud'a. So therefore we can take sabab mahd and take the majaz meaning of the hukam. فَكَانَ سَبَبًا مَحْضًا لِزَوَالِ مِلْكِ الْمُطْعَةِ. So the tahrir is a sabab mahd, not an illa. Yes? For the milkul mut'a coming to an end. So therefore you can take the sabab and mean the hukam. فَجَازَ أَن يُسْتَعَارَ. It is permissible to take as an isti'ara, a majaz, for talaq. Why? Because talaq is also muzilun li milkil mut'a. It also removes the access, removes milkul mut'a. Does everybody follow this? However, we have a question. What's the question? So وَلَا يُقَالُ mean it cannot be said, meaning there's a question and we'll give you the answer. What's the question? لَوْ جُعِلَ مَجَازًا عَنِ الطَّلَاقِ. If we say حَرَّرْتُكِ is a majaz of talaq. حَرَّرْتُكِ is a majaz for talaq. So حَرَّرْتُ is actually replacing which word? طَلَّقْتُكِ, isn't it? So لَوَجَبَ, this would necessitate أن يكون الطلاق الواقع به رجعيا كصريح الطلاق. This would mean that because حررت is deputizing on behalf of طلقت, and طلقت leads to طلاق رجعي, not طلاق بائن. What's طلاق رجعي? When you can give طلاق and you can do ruju within, before, as long as you only have one طلاق or two. And طلاق بائن is when you give talaq, you cannot do ruju, you have to do nikah again if you wish to get back together. So in sarih talaq, so look, the ruling is, you have different words via which you can give talaq. You have different words via which you can give talaq. One of them, or one group of these are called sarih talaq. When you use clear, explicit words to pronounce a talaq. For example, anti tariqun, anti mutallaqa. So all of these words are clear and explicit. The other type of words are kinaya words, which mean talaq, but they're not clear and explicit in talaq. For example, anti haramun and ilhaqi bi ahliki, go home, go to your family. So these words are kinaya in talaq. What are these words? They're kinaya in talaq. So in sarih al-fadh, what occurs? Talaq raj'i. And kinaya al-fadh, what occurs? Talaq ba'in. Yes, that's the masla from Qudud you've done already. Now coming back to our masla, if we say harrartuki is in majaz for talaqtuki, then it's replacing what? The sarih word, isn't it? So we're saying here that harrartu is replacing talaqtu. What's the ruling of talaqtu? Talaq raj'i or talaq ba'in? Talaq raj'i. So harrartu should also lead to talaq raj'i. We say no. Harrartu is actually a majaz of abantu. Like I've made you ba'in, I've removed the milkul but'ah. Which means I have removed my access. And that comes with ba'in. You understand? So it's not, let me explain the text in here. So لأننا نقول لا نجعله مجازا عن الطلاق. We're not saying harrartu replaces talaqtu. Rather, harrartu replaces azaltu milki. Yeah, azaltu milk al-mulk, azaltu milk al-mut'ah. And when is izalatu of milk al-mut'ah comes about? When you have talaq ba'in. Are you following? So harrartu, when it says majaz and talaq, is not replacing talaqtu. It's actually in place of the structure of the sentence of abantu. I have removed, I have completed the talaq. وَذَلِكَ فِي الْبَائِن. So when you say harrartu implies the milkul raqaba, and by default the milkul mut'ah has come to an end. And when does that happen? Talaq raj'i or talaq ba'in? In talaq raj'i, the milkul mut'ah doesn't come to an end. You can still do ruju'. So which means the harrartu should be talaq ba'in. So if that question is raised, we will say no, harrartu is not in place of talaqtu. The meaning of harrartu is I have removed, I have ended the milkul mut'ah. And that only occurs in ba'in. Why? إِذِ الرَّجْعِيُّ لَا يُزِيلُ مِلْكَ الْمُتْعَةِ عِنْدَنَا. Because talaq raj'i, you still have the choice to return. You're going to say, well, let's cancel the talaq. It's permissible. So therefore, harrartu would not lead to a talaq raj'i, rather it will lead to a talaq ba'in. Has everybody understood this? However, in this example, if he says to his slave girl, talaqtuki, what did he say? Talaqtuki. And he actually intended to free her. You will say, is that permissible? Well, it wouldn't count. You have to say, well, just say harrartuki afterwards and free her. But this statement, talaqtuki, to a slave girl would not free her. What's the reason behind of this? Because لا يصح لأن الأصل جاز أن يثبت به الفرع وأما الفرع فلا يجوز أن يثبت به الأصل. So what's أصل? لأن الأصل is the سبب. No, the hukam. So the hukam, it can be established via the illa. G. Yeah. So the asal, meaning the sabab, you can establish the fara, the hukam, which is the fara, via the sabab. You can say harrartu and say majazan, I intended the hukam, which is zawalu milki raqaba, zawalu milki bud'a. So لأن الأصل, because the asal is the sabab, via the sabab harrartu, you can establish the zawalu milki bud'a. Wa amma al-fara', as for the zawalu milki bud'a, فلا يجوز أن يثبت به الأصل. The asal cannot be established via this. You understand? Again, these rules don't apply to us in our time. We're looking at the thinking and the logic and rationale behind of these rulings, so that we can understand how the principles of Islam work. You understand? And we said before, it's only a one-way street. Sabab can be used, can be said, and the majazi meaning is the hukam that can be taken. But you can't take the hukam and then take the majazi meaning as a sabab, because that alaqa is not correct. Why is it not correct? You can do that in the other books, inshallah. وعلى هذا نقول, we say, ينأكد النكاح بلفظ الهبة والتمليك والبيع. If a person chooses to, this again, these are all just hypothetical scenarios to apply the ruling. You just say either nikah, you don't say bay'tu and wahabtu, you just say, right. What we're saying here, hiba, when you give somebody a gift, malaktu, I make you the owner of something, and bay'tu, I sell to you. So if the mabit is a slave, what happens now? By saying malaktu, wahabtu, bay'tu, I sell this item to you, I grant you ownership of this item, I gift this item to you. So all three of these things leads to the illah. What's the illah? What's this cause? Ownership. So if the thing was a pen, you become owner of the pen. If it was a car, you become owner of the car. If it was a slave, before emancipation, when we had slaves, if it was a slave, what would happen? You now own the slave. If that slave is a female, now you have access to her sexually. That also becomes part of the ownership. Correct? Are you following? So now, if you say hiba, tamliq, or bay, uses these words. A woman uses these words, or the wali uses these words after the permission of the woman. And he say, for example, I gift my daughter to you. And he said, my intention was nikah. He took permission from the daughter, and then he said, I'm gifting my culture out of respect, or out of just humility. He said, I'm gifting my daughter to you. Look after, she's a prize gift. He used the word wahabtuka binti. Or I'm giving you my daughter. I give my daughter's hand to you. Yes? Any of these words he uses. So is this, and he meant nikah. When nikah take place, will the nikah be valid? He said yes, because that majaz is correct. Why? It's from sabab to hukam. We're saying the sabab, but we actually mean the hukam, which is milkul mut'a, which is nikah. That's correct. We can say these things, and the nikah will be valid. Simply, it says the wajtuki or whatever, you just say those words. But in law, in a court of law, we will say this nikah is valid. Why? Because he said the sabab, and he meant the hukam, and this majaz is correct. Okay? لأن الحبة بحقيقتها توجب ملك الرقبة, because hiba is a sabab mahad. Why? Because حقيقة it causes ملك الرقبة, وملك الرقبة يوجب ملك المتعة في الإماء, and ملك الرقبة causes ملك المتعة in إماء. You understand? It's how the process and the thought process work in sabab and illa. Therefore, فكانت الهبة سببا محضا. So hiba is a sabab mahad, meaning not an illa, it's a pure sabab. لثبوت ملك المتعة فجاز أن يستعار عن النكاح. So you can use that, and the majaz meaning will be nikah. You understand? وكذلك لفظ التمليك والبيع. Yes? Yes? لا ينأكس. It doesn't go backwards. You can't go from hukam to sabab. Why? That mazhar doesn't work. That alaqah is not correct. So لا ينأكد البيع والهبة بلفظ النكاح. If the, for example, there's a market of slaves. Yes, again, these things don't apply, but just the ruling, the thought process. So if a person said to somebody else, nakahtukaha, zawajtukaha, I'm marrying this slave girl off to you, and they intend the opposite. What's the meaning? Gift or bay or tamliq. So that's not correct. That's not correct. That alaqa is not correct because of the principle of sabab and hukam. Do you understand? Ji. Acha, he's saying here, ثم في كل موضع يكون المحل متعينا لنوع من المجاز لا يحتاج فيه للنية. It's coming up later on as well in Sari and Kinaya. But what he's saying here is, in every place where the mahal, the location or the situation, متعينا, is determined for a type of majaz. Now when you say this word, we know majaz is meant. Yes? Let's say, for example, in Urdu, we say here, we're in a masjid, we're sitting in the front of the Imam Sahib, and Imam Sahib says to the person, have you witnessed the daughter taking permission? He says, yes. Have you, two witnesses, did you give permission? Yes. And then in Urdu we say, Fulane ne apne zaat ko aapke nikah mein diya. So we say, isn't it? So she has given you herself in nikah. So now the mahal is nikah taking place. After masjid, we had announcement, there will be nikah after salah. And then you're asking her, did you take permission from her? He said, yes, I took permission from my daughter or my niece or my granddaughter. Two witnesses, did you hear the permission? Yes, I heard the permission. Shall I do nikah? Yes. And then he said these words. So if I didn't have the Imam Sahib can't say later on, or when I said gave in nikah, I didn't mean nikah. So your intentions account because the mahal, the actual situation was muta'ayyin law min al-majaz. And when you say in Urdu, I gave myself, I gave my daughter to you. And everybody was talking about nikah and everybody was there to witness the nikah. And you printed the cards. You say, well, if you say, when I said I gave you my daughter, I never said I married my daughter. You say, well, no. The nikah, mahal, is muta'ayyin that the majaz meaning is intended. لا يحتاج فيه إلى النية. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. So now, there is one question which we discussed yesterday, but wasn't recording. Let's mention it quickly. The question is that, let's go back previously. The question is, somebody may pose a question that according to Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayhima, the condition for the majaz to be correct is that the haqiqah must be possible and it must be mumkin. It must to transfer from the majaz, to transfer from haqiqah to majaz. There are two conditions: sihhatul lafz and sihhatul ma'na. Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, he only looks at sihhatul lafz. So what if somebody says, for example, how can a woman use the word wahabtu nafsi? I give myself over to you, I give my daughter to you. The word give is tamlik, and you can only take the majaz meaning of give, which is nikah, if the haqiqah is possible, and a free woman cannot be gifted. So this majaz doesn't seem to be correct, so according to Sahibain's principle, because you can only go to majaz after the haqiqah is mumkin. So he says here, كيف يصار إلى المجاز في صورة النكاح. In the nikah situation, how can we go to majaz using the word hiba? Whilst tamlikul hurra, that a free woman to give her over as a bayt, as a gift, is muhal. Are you following? So he says here, لأن نقول, we will say, ذلك ممكن في الجملة. It is possible. Adatan, not possibly, but aqlan is possible. What can happen? A woman can become murtad, leave Darul Islam, go to another, leave the Islamic area. If she goes to the Islamic state, join the place, she leaves the Islamic area, and she goes to where? A country or a place with a war with the Muslims. Then in that situation, before emancipation, before all these laws that we have right now, she was captured, and then she becomes a slave. So then now she becomes a slave. So then for her to become wahabtuha ya mallaktuha is sahih. Get your sense? So all of these are principles via we can deduce rulings. Yes, these rules don't really apply in our time, but the ideas and the concepts and the rules and the precedents we're trying to study. Correct? And he gives the example, صار هذا نذير مس السماء وأخواتها. So simply is massu sama, meaning touching the clouds, because sama, there's no sama, it's just a fadha right to the top. But if it means sama, means anything above you. So if you can touch the sky, meaning touch the clouds. So what if somebody takes an oath that wallahi I will touch the clouds, or wallahi I will change this a desk into gold? Will that qasam be valid? We say yes, it will be valid. So the two aspects to this. One is, and I've explained it yesterday, it didn't get recorded, but it's already been discussed in the Mantiq video. Put the link in the description so they can watch it. There are a few things. One is called wajib, mumkin and mustahil. Correct? It's also called muhal. Wajib is something which has to be. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Mumkin is something that can be both, and mustahil is something that can never be. But in mumkin and mustahil, you have mumkin, two types of mumkin. Mumkin adatan and mumkin aqlan. So mumkin adatan are things that happen usually. And mumkin aqlan are things that can happen, but don't usually happen. And the mustahil, adatan, things that don't usually happen, but rationally possible. is very, very brief here. I explained it in class yesterday, it didn't get recorded, but it's already been discussed in the Mantiq video. Refer to that and understand this. What we're saying here is that in the Masjid Sama, I will touch the skies, I will touch the heavens, or I will turn this rock into gold. If you take a kafara, what will you say? The kafara is sahih because it's mumkin aqlan. Yes? And you have to give kafara immediately because it's mustahil adatan. We consider both aspects. So that's the ishkal, or jawab to ishkal of Imam Sahibain. That even though it's unlikely that whole situation occurs with the woman, but we can use the word wahabtu, mallaktu as majaz, even though the haqiqa is mustahil adatan or is qalil al-wuqu'. And we have precedent that we use mustahil adatan or we use qalil al-wuqu' and we apply rulings to that, like the masu sama, لأقلب هذا الحجر ذهبا. So anytime you take a qasam of something that is mustahil adatan, the qasam will take place and you will have to then give kafara because it's mustahil adatan. And it counts because mumkin aqlan. And mumkin aqlan wajib on that. Like in the video for that, inshallah. Okay? Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.